In this lesson, you've been learning some of the most common algorithms on arrays. Ms. Dovey demonstrated how to delete an item from an array and how to insert a new item into an array. In both of these cases, you are required to move elements around in the array to accommodate the change that you've made in the array. In this video, we're going to look at a few of the other common algorithms so that you can develop an arsenal of these building blocks, because all of these algorithms can basically be adapted to solve different problems in the future. We're showing you sort of the basic version of each one, and then when you do activities, you're going to have a chance to apply these concepts on your own. So the first one I wanted to demonstrate is shifting elements to the left. This is kind of like deletion in that you would have to move elements to fill up that space, but in this case, we're going to take the first element and move it to the end of the array. So we're taking all the elements, moving them one position to the left, and then taking the first one and moving it to the end. The way that we do that is by first, before we start shifting, saving that first element into a temporary variable. This is a very common practice that you're going to see anytime you want to swap values in an array, and this will be useful in the coding activity for this lesson because you don't want to lose the value at position 0. We're going to move other elements on top of it, and in order not to lose this, we need to save it into a temp variable first. Then we go through the entire list and we move all the elements that are one position forward into the position to the left. So I is where we currently are, and then I plus 1 is the element to the right, and we move it into position I. So we're shifting one at a time each of those numbers to the left. And you'll notice that to avoid going out of bounds, we also make sure that our loop stays less than list.length minus 1 instead of list.length. And then at the very end, we take that temp value that we had saved before and we put it into the end of the list on the right. So that's shifting elements to the left. Shifting elements to the right is going to look very similar, but in this case, we actually move the last element, the last value, to the front of the array at the end. And so here, we are saving that last value into a temp variable. Then we have a for loop. This time we're going to go from the end of the list to the beginning, right? So we're going backwards through the array. In each position, we are saving into that spot the element that was to the left, right? Because index minus 1 means, okay, what's the value that's directly to the left of this one? And then at the very end, we take our temp variable and put it back into position 0. So again, we're not losing any values this time in these algorithms. We're actually just shifting them in sort of a circular pattern through the array. All right, the last algorithm is probably the trickiest, but it's also in some ways the most interesting. This is the algorithm for reversing the elements of an array. This algorithm loops through half of the array and then uses careful indices to swap all the elements. Because in order to reverse the elements, what that really means is going through each pair of elements and swapping their positions. So we start with the last one and the first one and swap them, and then the second to last and the second from the beginning, or second from the first, and we swap them, and so on and so forth until we get to the middle of the array, and that's where we stop. So that's why our for loop only goes up to list.length divided by 2. That's why this is the index of the current last element, which is list.length minus I minus 1. And then, because as I increases, we move further and further from the end of the array. Again, we're using a temp variable so that we don't lose track of this one at position I. We swap j to I, and then temp goes into j. This pattern right here is the most common way to swap two elements in an array, and will be definitely useful for you in the coding activities. Okay, those are the last 3 common algorithms in this lesson. Congratulations if you've understood them all. At this point, you can go and practice, play around with typing this code yourself, and then you should be ready to take on the coding activities for this lesson. Good luck. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of the lesson on algorithms on arrays. At the beginning of this lesson, Ms. Dovey talked about how programmers strive in life to be as lazy as possible, and they call it efficiency. I completely agree with that, because one of the aspects of being a programmer that I love is being able to reuse code that I've already written and not having to write it again. This is kind of the idea of the patterns that you learned for writing different algorithms in this lesson. you learn how to do things like remove an item from an array, or insert an item in an array, or shift the elements around. Those are patterns that once you've written them a single time, you can reuse that code to apply it in lots of different situations. An example, or another example of an algorithm you can reuse, is the algorithm to sort elements in an array. We're going to learn some of those later in this class. Those are really important patterns, and once you've written that code, you don't ever have to write it again, which is the beauty of learning different algorithms and then being able to reuse that code.